Ramirez took the opportunity to work on his persona.
Mickey and Mallory. Feared by thousands.
I love you so much, baby.
I love you.
Watched by millions.
We're fading. Can't stop fading. Nobody can.
Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Robert Downey Jr., and Tommy Lee Jones.
What do you have to say to your fans?
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Natural born killers. In the media circus of life, they were the main attraction.
How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the Underrated series. I am your host, Steve Cravens. Joining me once again is my lovely wife, Noël. Welcome back, babe. And joining us, as per usual, Andres Gallego, aka Galleghost.
How's it going, guys?
And joining me once again, Terrence Tatum. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Haven't had you on since Minority Report, which was a lot of fun, but this one's going to put that one to shame because today we are talking about Oliver Stone's 1994 masterpiece, Natural Born Killers, which starred Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Robert Downey Jr., Tommy Lee Jones, Tom Sizemore, Rodney Dangerfield, you name it. I mean, this cast is just loaded from top to bottom. This is also one of the most controversial movies ever made. It has made many top 10 lists of, some of the most controversial American films to be released in the 20th century. It even made the top 10 most dangerous films ever made. There was even a lawsuit back in 1995 because a young couple dressed up as Mickey and Mallory took drugs and robbed a bank and ended up killing a teller. And Oliver Stone and Warner Brothers had to deal with that for 6 years and made it all the way to the Supreme Court. This movie actually had very, very humble, very basic beginnings. Tarantino actually wrote this script. It was much more in the vein of True Romance, Badlands, Bonnie and Clyde, very straightforward, kind of like a shoot 'em up, partner kind of movie. I don't know how to describe it. How would you guys describe Bonnie and Clyde and Badlands and all those movies? Like just a romantic kind of shoot 'em up? How would you say that?
Yeah, romantic crime drama. Like it very much, that's what it is. Like the romance is still a part of it, but the couple is the biggest part of those type of movies. And seems like that was the original theme for Quentin Tarantino, very much along the lines of True Romance.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think this film complements sort of Tarantino's first three scripts because I know he wrote Natural Born Killers, True Romance, and Reservoir Dogs as his three samples to go out into Hollywood. And when you really look at all three of those films, they delve in some way, shape, or form in terms of a dysfunctional relationship between two people or between people who you consider to be acquaintances with Reservoir Dogs, but this one is sort of the antithesis of True Romance, where it's just like, oh, this is a really messed up couple that do really messed up things, and not necessarily Clarence and Alabama. This is just the complete opposite, and it perfectly balances out with all the other Tarantino stuff as well. But yeah, it's it's a trip, man.
The original script that he wrote is actually really damn good. It's just, it's different. And Oliver Stone actually was going to film it as such. He was going to film it just straight, like as Tarantino wrote it, like he kind of wanted to do it as a movie he would have seen in his 20s back in the 60s. And as some very high profile murder cases were going on, O.J. Simpson and, serial killers getting a ton of attention, whether it was Richard Ramirez, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, like the media was just blowing, like the tagline of the movie says, the media made them superstars. And he realized that there was a lot more to say in this script than was originally written. And he realized after certain points, like, you know what? I thought I was going to make this movie. I kind of have to go this way and make this movie because it's so appropriate for the times we live in. So, babe, why don't I start with you? Obviously, the big thing about this movie is the kinetic camera work, the rapid fire editing, which was, we got kind of glimpses of it in Born on the 4th of July, but JFK was like full throttle. Oliver Stone's doing all these different camera moves, film stocks, everything like that. How do you think that his filming style for this movie, with all the different things he did, can you imagine the movie being any different? Like, would it have the same effect if he had not gone the full route of being like, no, you know what? I'm going to make this like a very expensive student film.
I mean, I love the way that it was shot. I think the changing and what film he used, the fast editing, using random stock footage of nature scenes and old television clips, and then using flashbacks within the scenes, and then you have nature kind of beauty shots going on in that motel room. I love this movie. I'm not surprised that it's underrated. I know that a lot of people watched it and were like, what is this? It's kinetic. It is disturbing. It is an acid trip. It is all of the things. It does point a finger at pop culture and media to be like, shame on you at what you feed a beast into. In short answer, no, I could not imagine this movie being shot or edited another way. I think it was really well done. I mean, I love it. I love it.
Terrence, what about you? Like, do you think that Oliver Stone could have filmed this? For example, like some of his earlier movies, like Platoon, Wall Street. Like they're stylish, but they're very kind of
more of a straightforward. Yeah, I don't think so. It's funny though, because this movie does remind another one of my favorite movies is like Moulin Rouge, and it's a very much a acid trip. Like I actually had people walk out of the theater from Moulin Rouge, and I could see that happening again, like happening with Natural. It's very stylized, and if you're not on board, you're gonna like, I don't know what this confuses me. I don't know what the hell this is. This is like a psychedelic id. Like you go from animation to like sitcom style to like first person perspective to jump cuts, and those weird jump cuts of Gale as the devil's blood coming down. Like, what the hell is happening? I love all of this, but this is bizarre, and it reminds me a lot how people consume TV. Like if you don't have that barrier or that introduction to like, this is what this is, if you're just consuming television, the way that media throws stuff at you, all different types of stuff, that's what this movie is. And that's sort of the point, because it's showing you how TV and media keep just building people up that don't necessarily need to be built up.
Yeah. No, Andres, what about you, man?
Oh, goodness. My first time watching this, it was the first time that I was aware of editing in a film in a way where it was abrasive and it made me feel sick. In fact, I was actually suffering from food poisoning the very first time I saw this. And I just remember just sitting there watching all these images just wash over me. And I was just like, God, I don't know if it's the food poisoning that's making me sick or if it's actually the real film that's making me sick.
It's the perfect way to watch it. It's like you took some mushrooms.
Yeah, right? Oh, goodness. But with this film, it's one of those things where at first it's the very definition of abrasive. And the one thing that you realize when you're rewatching this film again is the edits and the choices that Oliver Stone make and his editor. It's subtly genius. There are certain things where he plays with the colors, he plays with the film stocks. It's meant to keep you off balance all the way through. And in an odd way, that's sort of how we felt like as a society way back when in the 90s, when all this stuff was going down, where anybody could be a celebrity. You put out a sex tape or you freaking commit a whole legion of murders. It's one of those unsettling factors in editing that works so well with the type of vibe that Oliver Stone was going for, and it's genius.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Martin Scorsese, how he filmed The Wolf of Wall Street. Like very like kind of hyperkinetic. Like I want to give you the feeling of being on drugs, like of being like high out of your skull, like the constant rush of being on Wall Street, just like just that adrenaline surge. And not to mention Oliver Stone admitted, he's like, dude, I was doing all kinds of drugs when we made this. Like, I was dropping acid, cocaine, everything.
He had to be.
You could like. He
had to be. Yeah.
Yeah, he was out of his skull when he made this movie. And it's funny because like he actually said, him and Robert Richardson, who shot the movie, one of the great cinematographers working today. I put him probably a third under Deakins and under Lubezki, but
oh yeah,
he was going through a divorce at the time when this movie was being made. And he remembers like Oliver was just out of his mind on drugs. Like, like it was just a really like nobody liked the content of the movie. Like they just felt like dirty, like filming it. That even goes down to the cast, actually. Like, I mean, we're going to talk about our favorite scenes in just a little bit, but I mean, even the cast was just kind of like, they didn't quite understand what he was trying to do with certain scenes. Like, what are you trying to achieve here? It's honestly, I'm just like rewatching it last night with you. I was kind of like, Jesus, I kind of feel uneasy watching this movie. And it had been a while since I had seen it. No, I listen, I love it too. That's why we're doing it. But like the first 20 minutes are
brutal. I didn't feel uneasy whatsoever.
But there are some filthy moments where you kind of like, am I okay to like this as much as I do?
And that's the entire point, dude.
I mentioned how JFK was kind of like, you know, the precursor to Natural Born Killers in terms of Pietro Scaglia's editing and the rapid fire camera work, et cetera, and so forth. If you think about it, Natural Born Killers spawned an entirely new style of editing for feature films going forward.
Oh yeah,
Michael Bay, Paul Greengrass, Martin Scorsese, The Wolf of Wall Street. You see that hyperkinetic camera work, the hyperkinetic editing. Even going back to Darren Aronofsky in 2000 with Requiem for a Dream, that entire filming style was taken from Natural Born Killers. I mean, it may not be as wild in terms of the colors and the different film stocks. It's all 16 millimeter, but the pursuit of the atmosphere that he accomplished, especially in the winter section of the film, is, I mean, that is just, to be honest with you, I cannot think of a single movie. I know I mentioned JFK because it's Oliver Stone, but I can't think of a single movie before Oliver Stone kind of pioneered that movement with the camera that came before it. I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone will comment on this video and be like, oh, well, actually, you know, this person came up with it or this person. I think the one that's closest is probably the last 10 minutes of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, really. That's about the closest we got to just having like just an all-out assault on your senses, like close-ups, extreme close-ups, wide shots, you know, crazy shit. But other than that, Oliver Stone created a modern cinematic language that is still used today, which is just another testament to this movie's legacy in terms of cinema history.
I don't care how many drugs he was on. He did a fucking fantastic job. Like,
oh, yeah.
I don't go with it. Like, you know, maybe he was difficult to work with, you know, with it, you know, but maybe he's like that sober anyway.
He has gone on record to say that he was a bit of an asshole while this was being filmed. He said, like, he's like, there's some camera operators that hate me, especially, I guess, the prison sequence. He actually filmed in a real prison, and that they had, for the first 2 weeks, they had actual prisoners, and then that prison got on lockdown, so he had to bring in extras for the back half of it.
That's right.
Yeah. Some of those shots with like the gate, I guess a camera operator got his hand jacked up, and like they were all doing some guerrilla style stuff. So I'd imagine that once that scene, that film was over, they were like, I don't never want to fucking see Oliver Stone again.
Which I've seen a lot behind the scenes because I was so intrigued in terms of how the post-production went on this, and even just the production in general. Watching a couple of the interviews with some of the behind the scenes people, where it's like, you know, some of the grips and some of the keys and stuff like that, where they're just like, you know, they just look like they want to blow their brains out. And then you look at the cast and crew, and they said that they had the time of their life shooting this because it felt so freeing. And Oliver Stone is one of those directors that just feels like he's going to go with whatever crazy idea you have, as long as it makes the movie better and as long as it complements his vision. And that's one of those things where you watch the film, and for how chaotic and nuts it is, there's sort of a controlled chaos all the way through. And also knowing exactly how Robert Downey Jr. loves to work, and Downey Jr. way back when in the day is praising Oliver Stone in terms of what they were able to do, that just truly shows you exactly how malleable Oliver Stone is in terms of working with his actors, in terms of finding these small little moments. And it's again, you can't praise Oliver Stone enough for this film.
You thought? What you really thought was that I don't know the difference between Pepsi and a Coke.
Kids say the darndest things.
What are you looking at?
Why don't we transition right into our favorite scenes right now? Because I mean, there's so many great scenes in this movie. I forgot I can't remember if it was Billy Wilder or William Wyler, but someone said a great movie is 5 good scenes and no bad ones. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's a single bad scene in this movie, because it's just one scene after another, just one crazy moment after another, until eventually we get to the final, you know, whatever it is, 30 minutes of the movie, where it's just one big orgy of violence and just madness. It's just freaking anarchy. It's just nuts. But I have to say, like, when I think about this movie, I'm with you. The opening, I'll say this: the opening scene in the diner is probably my favorite scene. But I think I'm going to go ahead and say this: The opening, let's say 20 minutes of the movie, right up until when we get to, Wayne Gale and all that stuff. I don't think I've seen a movie that has been so rapid fire, that has gotten you so into the movie immediately with its style. Like, it just overwhelms you with like, no, this is the ride you're about to go on. And if you don't want it, there's the door. Like, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, we might pump the brakes a little bit and kind of like, keep it at one film stock for like, a minute or two. But this is going to be one constant roller coaster, man. And I think that opening 20 minutes with the rear projection, with the animation, 60 millimeter, 35 millimeter, the different, lighting techniques he's using. It's madness. And it puts you in their headspace.
Yeah. Switching to first person POV with the gun or the knife thrown through the window. I was like, what is this? I want all of this. I don't know what's happening, but I enjoy it. Let's keep going.
But it also lends that consumer ability to like, all this stuff and all this violence is happening, but they're throwing all these slapstick moments where the bullet freezes right before it goes into the cook's head, or the knife like literally stops right before it goes into somebody. It's just one of those things where, again, it's making violence consumable.
But that opening scene is my favorite scene in the movie. I love
phenomenal.
it fucking hits you. I love that you come into the middle of the story, and I just love the power behind Juliette Lewis as this kind of unassuming, like, little woman who's listening to music and being all like sexy and like just doing her thing, and these like creepy men come in and she's like, yeah, you bow, and like fucks them up. It's like it is my favorite thing in the world. It just is. You come out of the gate with a powerful female character saying, you can't fuck with me. Like, it is amazing. Like, how sexy am I now is like the best. Like, how sexy am I now? And like,
I love that line is at the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie.
Just like kicking his fucking ass. And it's great. And you don't expect, you're just like, all right, like something's going to happen. And you don't. So I love that, while Mickey's just being like, all right, I'm going to get her back. Like he's just hanging, letting her do her thing. Like he's like, she's got this. I don't need to rescue her. Like, he already rescued her, and now she's her own. I'm a new woman.
And
convertible. But it is that, and I just think it's such a great and powerful opening. This was done in such a different way, where we start in the middle, and then we go back in time to how they met in a sitcom environment. And to me, you think, like, people might complain at how, like, oh, it's so disturbing. Think about how more disturbing it would be if they did it linearly and you had to see her father molesting her. Let's say, and instead it is suggested. It is not really seen. It is, what's going on, and it's kind of, I thought that was a really smart decision.
I actually think it's
suggestiveness of everything that's in the film.
I actually think it's more terrifying to see that sequence being done with a laugh track.
Yes.
That's just like, okay, this is gross. Like, this is now super bizarre. And it's just calling out even more attention to how just effed up Mallory's family truly was.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, and it plays on the aspect of, as an editor, I've seen certain things behind the scenes where, you see certain shows without laugh tracks, and you're just like, how are you going to turn that into a comedy? And once you add the laugh track, it gets you to a point where you sort of feel comfortable to laugh at people's misery and misfortune. Like, it's one of those things where you watch something like Everybody Loves Raymond, you take out the laugh track, that turns into a dysfunctional family right there.
Depressive family, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it also goes into how TV and how media manipulates you into feeling a certain way, and just how certain things are inhuman, that once under a certain editing and once under a certain viewpoint, it makes it consumable, and it's utterly disturbing.
Well, I also think there's a point that in doing it too, where it's not to be taken too seriously, you know, where it's a commentary. It's not to be emulated. It's not to be glorified, like the two people who went in and took drugs and shot up the bank and killed a bunch of people, where the studio and Oliver Stone got sued for. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. You know, I think people who are sick in the head and want to do that shit are going to find an excuse to do it regardless of the movies that are out there. They'll just do it anyway. Those people would have done that anyway. They just decided to do it this way because they saw this movie. But I think when you do that freeze frame, bullet in the head, you saw that in cartoons. You know, and they had the comic book cartoons in there of him being the kind of these like superhero kind of villains in it. So I think there's this surrealism to it that makes you not take it as like a gas that, you know, the celebration of serial killers. Like I think it takes you away from that, you know, so you're more entertained at what the movie's doing than being offended by it. Or at least
I think that's the thing with a movie like this and Fight Club sort of is that if you watch this as a film where you're watching it and instead of saying this is a direct dramatization, then you're going to get the wrong things out of it. But if you go in knowing that this is a farce or a satire, then you're kind of like, this makes a lot more sense to me. And unfortunately, depending on where your brain waves are and how depressed and whatnot you are, you will fall on one way or another where you take it for on face value. But no, that's correct. Like her doing the eeny, meeny, miny, mo and all that stuff, that is supposed to be, okay, we're lighting this up because this is some dark stuff that's happening. We're lighting this up so that you can kind of understand the intricacies and how effed up all of this is, and we want to point this to you, but not like shove it over your face where you're disturbed by it. We want you to keep your eyes open. While it is disturbing, we want you to keep your eyes open, because if we give it to you on face value, you will turn away. We want you to watch this. We want you to see this, but we also want you to understand that this is not normal, and we have to put a little sugar on it to kind of get you to watch this.
Yeah, we're not celebrating this. We're actually doing the opposite of celebrating it, and also saying people who do celebrate this are part of the problem.
Correct.
Absolutely.
In terms of like being a satire and trying to be a comedy, I remember I think it was Roger Ebert that said, like he knows he's making a comedy. The problem is not everybody else knows he's making a comedy, and that's when people are going to be like, fuck this movie, like what is this trash? It's like no, you're watching it with the wrong. It's kind of like, you know what it is. I'm not saying it's the same quality. Like obviously one's up here, one's like right here. It kind of reminds me of Dr. Strangelove, because Dr. Strangelove's a straight up satire. And it's funny, but at some points, like I mean, we weren't around in the 60s. We weren't around when that shit was, God forbid, was going to happen. But people are laughing at this stuff, at the possibility of nuclear warfare and nuclear apocalypse, and they're laughing about it, and they're like, oh my God, should we be laughing about this? And that's the genius about that movie. You're laughing at things in this movie, and you kind of realize, well, wait a minute, this movie's pretty much holding up a mirror towards us. And saying, like, you're laughing at this is you. Like, you're laughing, like, you guys are taking this shit in. You guys, ingest this shit. I mean, it's brilliant.
Well, can we also talk about all the kind of like calls to Stanley Kubrick in the film?
Oh, Clockwork Orange. You guys notice the Clockwork Orange stuff in there?
It's great.
With her brother having the Alex DeLarge thing?
Yes.
And the mom having the purple hair like Alex.
But also, it is kind of in that, Clockwork Orange is a guy who was naturally violent, doing terrible things, and trying to be rehabilitated in a sense. So, it kind of has that same plot to it. And so it was really cool that he implemented kind of like the throws to that in there, little hints and.
Yeah, well, and y'all, that's also his son, by the way. That's Sean Stone, who's in all of his movies.
Yeah.
But it also kind of insinuates that, hey, this little guy, he's going to grow up to be Alex DeLarge now. Like, you just turned it's like, you're free, get out of here. It's like, that little look in his face, like, dude, he's going to do what they're doing.
He's going to do what they're doing.
Yeah. Exactly. What they're doing.
And it's crazy because you can
perpetual cycle.
And you can tell though that Mallory's like, I'm leaving you behind because we're about to go do some crazy stuff. She thinks she's doing the correct thing, but we all know that, oh no, Kevin's going to just F up some things.
No, and even Kevin knows exactly how fucked up Mickey is, where Mickey literally, the moment that they're doing the killing spree in the family, Mickey's about to go off and kill Kevin as well too, just to complete the cycle.
Yeah, he was about to like, I'm going to knock all these out. Mallory's like, hold on, no, he's one of the good ones.
He's fine.
I mean, he is kind of his voice of reason with stuff, even though she has boundaries and lines. where he does not, which, really is interesting to the female and male character, where like, although she came from where she's like, I have all this anger inside of me from my upbringing and how I was treated, and this man rescued me, and I want to spill out this rage. She has those moments of, oh wait, like I need to be morally better than what I've been doing. Like she kind of is a little bit of moral compass, even though it doesn't, obviously they kind of get what's coming to them with the rattlesnake and when the cops show up and they get caught. But I think, she in that dynamic is kind of the one that tries to ground him, even though they both enable each other to do terrible things.
So for me, the opening 20 minutes is the best aspect of the movie for me in terms of intros, in terms of getting you involved right away, telling the audience what this ride is going to be all about. Andres, what about you? What's your favorite scene in the movie?
Well, apart from the I Love Mallory scene, I think that's so great in the storytelling. But the other scene for me is actually the peyote trip in the tent. And I think so many subtle things that they're trying to say in that scene that just lend to the overall theme of what the film is. We're sort of putting these two on a pedestal. And at the end of the day, they're killers. And there's that really great moment with the native that he basically just talks about the rattlesnakes, where it's like, oh, there was a young woman who went up to a rattlesnake and then the rattlesnake freaking bit her. And then the woman goes, why'd you bite me? And he goes, bitch, you knew I was a snake. and that's exactly how I feel, how we are sort of putting Mickey and Mallory on a pedestal and the media is kind of soaking them up. And when really at the end of the day, these two people they don't care about the media. They don't care about what's going on around them. We are glorifying them, and at the end of the day, they're killers and they will tear you apart. But in terms of the editing style, in terms of what they were going for in that, I thought it was just magical all the way through. So that peyote scene is probably one of my favorite ones. And it also leads into them in the pharmacy with the green hues and all that other stuff. It's truly one of the more trippier moments of the film.
It's also one of the first times you get to see Mallory, a little bit of a humanity in Mallory, because she was really broken up and confused to why Mickey would kill him. She's like, what did you do? Like he was, and even to a smaller extent, you saw it a little bit with him, because he was like, I didn't want to kill this dude.
It was the night terror that made out of a bad trip, made him shot him, and like, what did you do? He fed us. He gave us life.
Yeah.
Like bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bad.
Like acts like him like a small puppy almost. I was like, that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's really well done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing that scene brought out as well, too, is that you sort of feel that both of these characters are both suffering from some form of arrested development, where they're technically, like, even though they're murderers and all this other stuff, internally, they're still kids. Internally, every time Mallory screams at Mickey or they have a fight, he has that moment in his head where he flashes back to when he's a kid. And it's one of those things where you kind of feel that these characters are not progressed from the moment that they were abused or the moment that all these traumatic things happen to them. And it also just leads to that question of, oh, is it nature or is it nurture more than anything else for those violent tendencies? So yeah, absolutely so.
And psychologically, that is what happens to people who from traumatic childhoods who experience abuse, is that they do go through arrested development because they are basically like stuck at the same age when the abuse started. So it takes a really long time to break out of that. Not like saying like, oh, and then they go kill a bunch of people, but both of them are struggling with demons that had started at a very early age that continue to haunt them still into their adulthood, which was interesting when I remember Wayne Gale had the interview with who was the comedian that they interviewed, where he was like, oh, Mallory Knox, she doesn't like you, and no, she doesn't. What would you say about them both being like sexually molested as children? And it's the psychiatrist giving his opinion, and he's like, I don't think that's something that happened. So also it's a commentary on like the denial of mental health and that people are just inherently evil and their backgrounds have nothing to do with it. It's such a multi-layered movie, and it's so easy to dismiss it as some fucked up druggy movie, know. And I think like you have to give it a chance, because I think it actually stands even more powerful now today, because the media is present everywhere in Instagram and Facebook, and like we are getting like everything shoved down our throats now, more than we were in 1994.
Yeah, so you're inundated with a news cycle 24/7 nowadays. It's funny that you mentioned that, because being at that age and like being at 14, I actually remember the 90s. Like we were hit with like Tanya Harding and Buttafuoco and Menendez brothers, like OJ, all of that was happening at that time. So like, and they were like stars. Like they would captivate, lock our TV. Like the NBA Finals was removed because OJ was driving in a truck.
Yes,
that was happening right now. So that's how big it was. That's why one of my favorite scenes in this is that montage that they have where they're talking to all the people via camera, like, hey, oh, they're so hot, they're so cool. And like, I don't condone murder, but if I was a mass murderer, I'd be Nicki and Matt, like, huh? How are why are we glorifying that? But it's crazy because that's what was happening in real life. Like people were fetishizing like Amy Buttafuoco and all of that, and like Amy Fisher, and Buttafuoco, like all of that stuff was getting heightened to a point where they're like, oh yeah, OJ may have killed her, but he's still a good dude. Like, no, you're taking the wrong things from all of this.
Yeah. It's brilliant, man. I mean, it's and that final montage at the end is kind of finally where like Oliver Stone's basically saying, if you haven't gotten what I've been trying to tell you this entire movie, one last attempt to tell you what I'm trying to say. Like,
wait, don't you leave one witness? We do. Your camera needs to like, yeah.
I love that because I mean, I had a college professor who he hated everything about Oliver Stone in his movies because he feels like Oliver Stone talks down to his audience. He thinks Oliver Stone's very condescending and sometimes irresponsible. And I said, well, what about Natural Born Killers was so condescending or irresponsible? And he said, do you remember that scene when they're in the prison and Robert Downey Jr. is speaking into the microphone, he's talking into the camera, and someone says something to him off screen, he says, no, hold on, man, like these idiots will believe anything I tell them. And he said, you know what, Oliver Stone just called me an idiot. I'm gonna leave. It's like, well, he's kind of talking to society. He's talking to everybody saying, look, these idiots will believe anything I tell them. We're the media. They'll take anything we say as law. Like,
it's not untrue either. Like the behind the scenes of what goes into what is produced and put out there for the general public is nauseating, and and it is one of those things where it called it out in this movie. It called it out, and it was in your face about it, and it's unapologetic because they get away. They have their happy life with their kids at the end. It's like they get what they get at the end. They had a little bit of the redemption by being apart from each other, right? Mm-hmm. We're done with killing. We just want to like go ahead and live our lives, and they did. So it's not like this is some kind of story where they're like, oh, Mickey and Mallory are gonna have to be, hung, electrocuted. It wasn't that movie where the criminals get their comeuppance.
I feel like Oliver's biggest thing in this, and that's why the script sort of changed, that media became the villain. And the movie has media being the villain, and Gale is the representation of that. So once you take him off the board, once he is the antagonist, once he's the guy that needs to die, and the protagonists go off into the sunset. So while, yes, this is titled Natural Born Killers, and they are the beacons of most of the violence in this, they are actually the protagonists, and Gale represents. That's why he keeps popping up as the devil with blood all over the place. He is media, and he represents the bad guy, and it's why a lot of people were like, "Wait, the killers got away?" I love this movie.
But the thing is, even going along with that, they're the protagonists, and in technical terms, the protagonist has to, in some way, shape, or form, they have to change by the very end of the film. And Mickey, Mallory, Knox, while they are killers, they do undergo a drastic change in about the second act that propels them forward into exactly what happens in the third act, where they're like, you know what, we're going to give it up. But the other thing is, Robert Downey Jr. as an antagonist, he also faces some change as well too. But the thing is, you actually see that while Mickey and Mallory Knox's changes, for lack of a better word, positive, where they want to give up the killing, by the very end, Robert Downey, during that entire riot sequence, he's like, yeah, let's murder everybody. And he gets this freaking jolt of electricity, and then he's like blasting people left or right. He's like, he calls up his wife and he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm done with you. You can go suck on it. And then he calls up his girlfriend and he's like, yeah, so I'm a new person. And then like his wife, he leaves his wife, his girlfriend dumps him. And at the end of the day, he's like, he realizes that even with that jolt of electricity, he's still a worthless piece of garbage by the end. And that goes to the entire point.
He starts getting drunk with power at the end there. And to the point where he's like, hey, I can go ahead and film these murders with you as we go along. Like, wait.
Yes! Yeah.
He completely has lost his mind in all of this.
Hi, guys.
Hey, we got some soda. OJ, purple stuff, Sunny Delight.
Sunny Delight. Yeah.
What's in this?
Tastes like orange and tangerine.
Yeah, lime.
Some healthy junk too.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
What you guys doing? Shut the fuck up and drink your juice.
You got a bad mom.
Sunny Delight, so good mothers can be great moms too.
So while we move on to some of our favorite performances, I think you could handpick just about any performance in this movie and no one would argue with you that it's fucking awesome. I mean, everybody in this movie, top to bottom, is great, but I'm gonna go ahead and say, because I have a feeling some other guys are gonna get mentioned, my favorite is Tommy Lee Jones because of how over the top he is. He's
nuts. Yeah.
He's ridiculous. I mean, like, and his especially when the riot first starts happening, it's like his hair is all out of control. He's like foaming at the mouth. Yeah.
When the milk just drops on his face and he just keeps going, I was like, what? He's nuts. He is completely gone.
Remember when they're walking down they're walking down the main hallway here. The riot is going on and like everything's going on, and one of his security guards comes over and hands him a piece of paper. What's this?
Yes.
Prisoner inventory. What the hell do I need this for?
I want to listen to hostages. What the fuck do I care about them?
It's just beats the shit out of him with it. Scagnetti's dead. not a big loss. He's like, and listen, I know there's other better performances, but there's just something about Tommy Lee Jones, especially in an unlikable role. And I think Tommy Lee Jones is actually pretty unlikable in almost everything he does.
Like, he's a natural curmudgeon all the time, so he just automatically lands in the, you're a dick.
Yeah, like, has that air about him. Like, you know, even in Lincoln, when he plays Thaddeus Stevens, he's such a curmudgeon, like you say. He's just like always grouchy and nothing's ever good enough for him, talking shit all the time. That's the best Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones as the warden is fan-fucking-tastic.
Yes.
Terrence, what about you? When one performance that stands out of all of them for you?
So the one that I just could not take my eyes off of, I was captivated the moment she walked on screen, was Juliette Lewis. Like, she insane. Yes. To the point where two of my favorite movies of all time involve Juliette Lewis post this, because I was like, I'm watching everything she does. Like, From Dusk Till Dawn and The Way of the Gun, I absolutely adore. And it's because like she also happens to be in that as well. But like, yeah, I could not take my eyes off of her at all. And it's weird because I thought she was just stunningly gorgeous and a spitfire. And I think that's what turned, like, this girl is like a bottle of lightning, and you just open it up and it just shoots the fuck out. And you don't know what you're going to get from performance to performance. And in this, I didn't even know what she's going to get from scene to scene in this film. Like, for her to go, like, we said earlier with the opening sequence, from that to the sequence in the jail cell when Tom Sizemore is trying to hit up on her and does the whole, like, putting the toe on the cigarette and all that stuff. It's just so many small nuances that she was capable of doing that I was like, I am in awe of this woman, and I can't stop watching this.
Oh yeah, no, and even also bringing up some things that she had done earlier before that. Cape Fear. She's one of those actresses that she feels sort of untethered or uninhibited. It's just like you have a feeling that she's willing to go wherever she needs to go in order to make a character as good or as bad in this film as she possibly can. And there's something just very admirable about her performance all the way through that I don't think anybody else could have captured in this role. And she's a perfect role for Woody Harrelson.
So would you agree with Terrence that Juliette Lewis is your favorite performance in the film?
I would actually say my favorite performance of the entire bunch in the movie, even though he has a very small role, is Rodney Dangerfield. Because again, he is primarily known as a comedian all the way up until that point in time. and just the ugliest, most deprived human being, even still this day, in anything I've ever seen. And he pulls it off with such a weird balance of like, okay, we're meant to sort of, with the laugh track, we're sort of meant to laugh at as what he's saying because he is a comedian, but at the same time, when you turn off that laugh track, he is probably one of the most disturbing aspects of the film. And I don't think he gets enough credit in terms of bringing that tone and either going between the light side and between the dark side. And it's such an interesting performance, I would say, for the entire film. And again, he is a presence throughout the entire film with even Mallory's flashbacks. So
That's come in. I mentioned this a little bit off mic, but Robert Dangerfield did all of his own lines. Like the script was one way. He went in and completely changed his lines and did them himself, which makes that even inventive as hell, but also just creepy. But it's clear he put them in a way that he could deliver them. It's like, I need to get more into this myself than what is actually on script, and I think it paid off.
Well, he didn't understand what the hell. I can't believe this, but Oliver Stone said he didn't understand why they were doing this in like a sitcom. He's like, I don't understand what you're trying to achieve here. Like, what are you trying to say? And like, and it's funny because he was like, this is the first dramatic role I've done, and I feel. He's like, I don't like this.
I don't think that's surprising though, because it's such you have to understand, people like to be force fed, what they know. It's like audiences like to know setup, third act, payoff. Like that is what they like. They don't like things to be out of order. They don't think things like to be in a new style, and as I mentioned before, like he probably was looking at it as like, oh, I'm going to play this like dramatic role of a father who molests his daughter and this. So like it's put in this like sitcom kind of role. He's like, I don't understand, which I don't blame him for being like, I don't understand it, because I think it was very visionary of Oliver Stone to put that in. And I think you have to be in that very progressive mind, very artistic mindset to be like, no, this is a statement I want to make.
Juliette Lewis still speaks fondly of this because I think like the anniversary just happened. She was like, Woody Harrelson and I, every time we see each other, we're just like, do you know how much fun we got to play with that? Aww. Like the whole sequence of her putting her legs up on him on the car, she's like, I just pulled that out of my ass, and Oliver was like, cool, we're keeping that.
And that was, not to, just because we're speaking of our favorite performer, like I agree with you, Terrence. Juliette Lewis is the standout. I would argue even her best role that she's ever done. She's done a lot of great stuff. Cape Fear, she was great, but she was a supporting actress. She wasn't the, main character or protagonist. She's done amazing things, since then. But her, like you say, spitfire, her power, her everything that she brought, and the range of emotions that she brought to the screen, and just this organic, natural feeling of connecting to this character in a certain way, where she came from, falling in love with Mickey, and then empowering herself, and then her struggle through that. I don't know. I think I agree with you, Terrence. I think she was amazing. They're amazing actors. Woody Harrelson is amazing too. Robert Downey Jr. is amazing. But
go on.
We can't even speak to the talents of Robert Downey Jr. enough. Like just that voice that he did with the Australian.
Yeah.
he probably loved being working with Oliver Stone. He was probably doing drugs together. This was back when he was.
He was fully.
He was out of control back then. Yeah. So they were probably Oliver's like, hey, after we do this,
well, whatever, it worked.
Juliette Lewis is great.
So I agree. My favorite performance, Juliette Lewis, for all of the same reasons, Terrence. And I think it's just, I think we forget, at this time, people are so hard up on we don't have enough strong female characters in the film, but you look back into the 90s and we had a lot of those back then. So maybe what happened in the 2000s? We had a lot coming out. And you look at Juliette Lewis as Mallory Knox, you have Ripley, Sigourney Weaver as Ripley. We had Linda Hamilton. We had strong female characters coming out.
Fifth Element is also there too. So yeah.
Clarice, Jodie Foster,
Mila Jovovich in Fifth Element.
So
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Catwoman. we had those. So it's interesting to like what happened where people are feeling like that is lacking now, you know, where we need more of it, and almost now it's done in a way that is, I would argue, and I won't go on into this, but almost not well done because it's just trying to fill a box.
Pandering.
Like, here you go, here's Ghostbusters with women.
Yeah,
like, here's women.
Like,
yeah.
And we can, and audiences can smell the bullshit. It's like, you're just doing this because there's pressure to it. You're not doing it because you want to do it or because...
Or you have an idea to get here. Right. You didn't get an idea to come to this. You was like, let's do this story with women. They like women now. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, they like women.
Oh, yeah.
Now. Let's make women movies. Let's do this.
What do you see?
Slim Jim. Slim Jim. Slim Jim!
But you brought it up, and I think this is a great question for everybody. I was going to ask the question. This is the Underrated series. We talked about why we love these movies, why people should give it a chance. And you mentioned back in the 90s, we had all these, you know, strong females in these movies. If you were to talk to a person from a different generation, let's say you're talking to your brother and sister.
Which I was today about this movie.
How would you sell this movie to them and encourage them to see it? What would be your selling points of like, okay, this is a movie that is misunderstood. These are the reasons why you should see this movie and why it's still relevant and why it holds up.
Well, I think it's even more relevant today because of how much more the media is shoved down our throats. I'm like, I'm sorry, but like these kids are so overwhelmed with information on the internet. Like, you can find so many things between YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Some things are good, some things are bad. But I think there's a necessary kind of evil about it, and this film shows that face of that, and is a huge fuck you to the manipulation that the media does to people to instill control and fear and insecurity and depression and all of the things that like people feel like when they go on Instagram and be like, why don't I look like that? Why don't I have that house? Why don't I have that job? Oh, I need all this other stuff. And this movie, I think, is more relevant now than it was almost 20 years ago because of that. You know, and I think you have to open your mind up to know that it's in a different style, though. And it's actually what I told my brother and sister, who are 22 and 25. So in talking to, kind of the younger generations who would want to see this, I'd say, yes, it's different. Yes, it seems chaotic, but the shots that are used, there's a point and purpose to it. And I actually think that people who have no idea what this film is about will actually really like it. And especially if you love stuff like Fight Club, Clockwork Orange, like this is in your wheelhouse. This should be part of your cult classics because it is in that genre, and it holds up to there. And it's a real shame that it's not really put up to that caliber. It really is. It's kind of seen as kind of like a flop, I think, and being like, oh, it was, that's just some weird Oliver Stone movie, like that about killers. And it's like, no, it's about so much more. So it's and it is more prevalent, and I think even for people to watch today than it was almost 20 years ago, for sure. And everyone asking for strong female characters. Mallory Knox shot somebody for bad head.
Apparently everybody thinks it was well-deserved.
I'm just saying.
If she were to get put on trial and the first, she'd get off.
The guy understands.
Well, because she did it before.
But Terrence, what about you? If you were to sell this to a person of a younger generation, or maybe someone who wouldn't be interested in this topic, how would you sell it to them?
It's kind of a piggyback off of what she just said, though, because I do like it. The problem with a lot of kids today is that they're born with a phone and a computer and a tablet in their hands. So unlike us, we can cut off when we get offline. Like, we can separate the two, where a lot of kids can't. Like, this is their world. They don't know how to shut this off and separate them. And I think that's a part of the issue with what this film was showing, even though they didn't really have social media back then, is that a lot of the stuff that's going on in their head, what they're viewing, these pop culture references and this imagery, is a part of the pop culture feeding into them, and they magnify and amplify this cycle of violence that happens with them. And I think this movie does a good job of showing like there should be a bridge between what TV and media give and what the kids are learning, and that should be the parents. And I think without them, this is what can sort of happen. I think it'd be kind of important for people, even if it's just like you sit down with your kids and watch this with them, to say, hey, this is sort of why media becomes a bit of an issue. I think another film, even though it's not as well revered, but later on, 15 Minutes comes out with Robert De Niro, and it's sort of in the same way. It's like media is a shit show, and we need to kind of go ahead and say, hey, you can't live your life through this. You have to do and find other outlets besides putting your entire stake of what you are as a person based on what happens in this screen. And I think this movie does a good job of saying, hey, this is what can go wrong if you amplify and take the wrong things or amplify the wrong messages without someone being there to show you, hey, this isn't it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Andres?
Well, to piggyback off of Noël and Terrence on this as well, I think for so many reasons, this film still holds up fantastically well. I mean, you have strong performances all the way through. You have a chaotic editing style. This movie for me was a big eye-opening experience in terms of my path as an editor and in terms of just what made me feel certain things. And I feel that Natural Born Killers is a editor's playbook on how to manipulate and how to make people feel a certain way in terms of what's being presented in the film and in terms of what the audience outside of the film is being presented in as well. And just even going off of how this movie is so far ahead of its time and how it's so relevant even still to this day, there's a particular theme that, you know, there's sort of a coalescence between violence and entertainment. And you look at a lot of the stuff that's popular now on Netflix, all the crime docs, all the Night Stalker stuff, the documentaries. We have a fascination with criminals and violence that this movie flat out called way back when in the 90s, and it was dismissed as just nothing more than an Oliver Stone head trip, when in actual fact it was a mirror, and it was far ahead of what everyone else was doing in terms of saying, we are putting these killers on a pedestal and we're glorifying them only for ratings and only for views. And there's something to be had with this. I just think it's one of the best examples of satirization and just putting a mirror in front of society. And it's such a great film altogether. So personally for me, it has not aged a day since I saw it 15 years ago.
It's pretty wild that it's so rare that a movie can be at this point almost 30 years old and still just be as relevant as when it came out. The way I would actually sell it to someone of a younger generation, aim for the Marvel crowd. Be like, if you love Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, like see him like when he's really acting his ass off. Go ahead and check this out. And same thing with Woody Harrelson. Oh, if you loved War for the Planet of the Apes, for example, or
Zombieland.
Zombieland. Love those movies. Give them a look here. Kind of like go to like what they know them from, and then sell them on that, and be like, hey, they were great. This was them when they were younger. So that would be the way I would go with the younger generation, is just sell them on who's in it, and then if they're intrigued enough to ask what it's about, just kind of say like, it's basically putting the media on blast, and it's a modern day Bonnie and Clyde story. That's how I would basically try to sell it. But again, it's underselling it. It's underselling, but you have to, if you're gonna get this movie in front of younger generations, you're gonna have to undersell it on a very superficial level to even get them to be remotely interested in it.
Yeah, because there's so much happening in this film. You would lose them if you try to tell them like the 4 or 5 layers that are happening. And be like, I don't want to see that then. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be like, why? My head hurts.
Where's the cream filling?
So yeah, I think that'll do it for us today, talking about Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. Not just an underrated movie. I'm gonna go ahead and say this: it's an underrated masterpiece.
Yes,
it really is. And I would go ahead and say, as much as I enjoy Any Given Sunday, I think this is probably the last must-see Oliver Stone movie, because for some guys just are like Icarus. They just fly too close to the sun and then they burn out. They never recapture that magic that they once had. And he's made good movies since, but Natural Born Killers was like him at his peak. And then it was just kind of like he lost that juice. He lost that invigoration that he had. And it's kind of sad. And Terrence, we've talked about this before. Andres, we talked about this before. It fizzled out.
Yeah.
It just happens sometimes, and it's kind of a shame. All the same, groundbreaking masterpiece. If you have not seen the movie, I don't know what you watched this whole thing for, but if you haven't seen the movie, please go out and see Natural Born Killers. Rent it, do whatever you can. It's worth your time. It more than holds up. It's more relevant now than when it came out, arguably. So if we're here at High Voltage Media, Noël, Terrence, Andres, aka Galleghost. Terrence, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Terrence Tatum, and I also do a podcast called Hollywood Already Did It, and a YouTube channel called Hollywood Already Did It. You can find that there. Right now, we're doing the history of sitcoms through the eyes of WandaVision, which is pretty cool.
Well, I can't wait for you guys to cover I Love Mallory. I can't wait for that.
Right, I was like, I very much got the WandaVision vibes with this one, yes.
And Andres, buddy, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Galleghost. You can also find me on twitch.tv as Galleghost209. I'm going to be doing a couple other things with that Resident Evil related, so you have that to look forward to.
And for those of you out there who love to work on the video, Andres, that is all his work. And I am Steve Cravens. Thank you so much for watching the underrated series, Natural Born Killers 1994. Hope you enjoyed. We'll catch you on the next one.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.